Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Jarrell Mason, otherwise known as J Mace from the Time Machine on WUAG 103.1 FM, playing the best in new old school hip-hop, R&B, and everything else in between. With me on the phone right now, I have Steve West, creator and founder of the radio website airchecks.com. Mr. West, welcome to the Time Machine.
Well, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to do this interview with me.
Oh, no, it's no problem at all. The schedule is every day I put something up, seems like, or I'm always working on the site. But classic radio is just a very important thing to me. So. And
we're going to get into that with this interview. Now, to start it off, when did you first fall in love with radio?
Oh, my goodness. That's a really good question. I fell in love with radio probably in my early teens. I'll be honest with you, it's kind of a neat story. In 1976, my mom gave me a radio and a cassette recorder for Christmas. Now, I know this is really going back a ways, but that set me on a course because, I didn't know what I was going to record. First, I put a mic up to the TV and started recording Red Sox baseball. But, that was fun. But I really started listening to the radio and found something really neat to record. My mom always listened to WBZ, which at the time was the biggest music station in New England. And of course, the other station, WRKO in Boston, was really known as the Big Top 40, but I couldn't get it where I was from. It was just too far away. So I started listening to that, and then having this recorder, I would listen at night, and all these great top 40 stations would come in. WKBW, WABC, WLS. It just grew on me. I just thought it was the coolest thing. I mean, these DJs were so entertaining. They'd make me laugh. They'd make me cry. The music was great. So that kind of went along, and sometime around 1978, I just started keeping some of these tapes. I wish most of them I still had, but I've lost them over the years. That's how it all started. Just a healthy love for what I was hearing. It was magical. I got to tell you, one of the magic things was you could get all these stations from so faraway cities, and it was because it was on AM, and I could hear things that I could never hear in my home market. It was great.
Yeah, I bet it was. And now, what did you do to get your foot in the door?
Well, probably a different way than most people do today. I was sitting around the table New Year's Day, 1980, and I can remember having this discussion with my mom. What are you going to do with yourself? You're getting to that age, you ought to start thinking about it. I guess I was 16. And she said, well, why don't you go down to the local radio station and see if they'll put you on the air, and maybe you could learn something. You love radio, that's all you do is listen to the radio. And I thought about it, and I said, Mom, that's a really good idea. Now, understand this. At 16, I was introverted. I was one of these guys that was scared to go on stage, so this is a huge deal to me. Wow, I could be a DJ? It was kind of intriguing, but I was scared to death. I went down to that radio station, and the next day, because, New Year's Day, nobody was there. It happened to be a Monday, as I recall. I went down, and I talked to the owner. Guy's name was Dick Partridge. His claim to fame was having been on WNEW in New York, working with guys like Ted Brown and Mark Simone and all those. He was also the national voice of Lucky Strike cigarettes back in the 60s before they banned cigarette advertising. So he had been around radio for a long, long time. And, he allowed me to come in and put records away and watch the DJs. This went on for 9 months. They finally allowed me on the air with one of the DJs. Thanksgiving Day, 1980. I will never forget this day. I sat down in that air chair. My hands were shaking like a leaf as I was hitting these old cart machine buttons. I swear, I must have been the worst disc jockey ever to go in the air. It was amazing.
So you were sweating bullets?
Oh, yeah, I was sweating bullets. Oh, yeah. And back in those days, we, radio had not really evolved. The CDs weren't around yet. The way we actually did our music was records, 45s and albums. We didn't even cart our music. Every now and then, there was a few songs that the program director, he had the music and we didn't, and he would put those on a cart. But most of our music was queued up, Q-Burn 45s. Nobody understands what a Q-Burn 45 is today, but basically when you queued up records for long enough, you would get this sound when it started. And so we played those, and all our commercials were on carts. And at this station, the DJ did all the commercials live, except for the few that were carted up. We did the news, the weather, the sports, and you played disc jockey. You did everything. And it was really trial by fire. You learned by doing. No better teacher in the whole world. I mean, it was just, it really was a different era.
Yeah, I can definitely relate because some of the equipment we have here, we operate on Denning carts, turntables, and actually in the production room, we have a reel-to-reel machine just sitting there, and I'm like, thank God for Adobe Audition.
Yes, Adobe helps quite a bit. It's a lot easier than splicing tape, cutting it with a razor blade, and putting it together with a little Scotch tape. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you've got that old equipment in there. Used to be, back in the day, when people would edit their commercials, doing their production, they would spend a long time producing a spot. You voiced the spot, and anytime you made a mistake, instead of recutting it from scratch, you would mark a spot with a grease pencil on the tape. Then you would take a razor blade and you would cut where you wanted to cut. You cut out the bad part. Then you take where you picked up again, and you would bring it over and you would tape these together with some special tape that was the same width as these reel-to-reel tapes. So it was a different era. And then you did overdubs, put the music down afterwards. I mean, it's just a different world back then. It was amazing.
Sounded like a headache. I probably couldn't do it because it was very tedious, and you really had to be precise with your cutting because if you cut the wrong part, you're screwed.
Well, yes, but you know what? I never considered it a pain. I actually enjoyed it because, first off, you don't get into radio because it's tedious. We got into radio because we loved it. And so going back there was, what production, I suppose you could call it a black art back then, because people that could do really good production, you really had to know what you were doing.
So tell me real quickly about the transitional period when the AM stations went over to FM, and now only on AM you have talk radio, weather, and like Christian stations.
Well, what I think happened, and there's a lot of different reasons why music went away from AM, but starting in the late 70s, I want to say around 1977 or so, the FM stations really started to take hold. It really didn't take off, I would say, until 79, but the beginnings of the end, I guess you could say, began around 1977 as audiences began to migrate over to FM. Part of that was because prior to that, most of the FM formats that were out there were beautiful music, classical music, and then you had a couple of underground rock stations that evolved into AOR, which was album-oriented rock, the predecessor to today's classic rock and active rock stations. Back then it was a lot more, the playlists were incredibly wide. And then in each market you'd have one or two top 40 stations that would come on the FM band. And as those came on, the audiences began to migrate over. But what really changed it was manufacturers found a way to make receivers that they were more sensitive and would lock onto these frequencies, because FM was very prone to multipath. I mean, technically it still is, but the receivers are so much better today, they're not suffering the same problems that they had back then. Also, one of the problems with AM today is that about a decade and a half ago, the FCC reduced the bandwidth of AM signals down to, 9 kilohertz today. It used to be something like 13. By doing that, it cut a lot of the audio frequency ranges out, and then music started sounding muddy. So, basically speaking, the audience migrated over to FM as the formats became more exciting, radios became better, and actually the new formats started sounding a little bit different and a little hotter than what was going on AM. And I guess that's probably the best generic explanation that I could give you. There's a lot more factors, but it would take me an hour to get into it.
Right, and real quickly, let's go into the death knell of the industry, those nice little Arbitron books where if you don't do good in your market, somebody may get cut.
Arbitron certainly has made things more competitive. There used to be a lot of other rating services. If you go back to the early 70s, the 60s, you had Pulse. That was a big one. Say WABC was rated by Pulse, and a lot of these were. Arbitron is just another ratings company that came along. Television has Nielsen. The rating services are not the